Hello and welcome to the Hopecast with Rachael Flick. Rachael is a speaker, inspirational author, and an overcomer. As Rachael is walking through her own journey of grief, she's challenging others to persevere and overcome their own circumstances. Find out more at rachaelflick.com. Here now is your host, Rachael Flick.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Hopecast. Today, my guest is Amy Downs. She is the CEO of Allegiance Credit Union, formerly Federal Employees Credit Union in Oklahoma City, which lost more than half of its employees in the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, the deadliest domestic terror attack in our nation's history. In the years since the bombing, Amy became a mother, lost 200 pounds, competed in an Ironman triathlon, obtained her MBA, and became CEO of the same credit union that was bombed. Though an inspirational subject in national and local media for more than 2 decades, Amy's message has shifted from her survival of the bombing to her radical transformation in the aftermath. Amy, welcome to the Hopecast. I'm so glad to have you here today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so I'm a Kansas girl. Okay, I grew up in Wichita. And so, this was obviously national news for everyone, but I very specifically remember as like a 14-year-old watching the news that day. And so, there's a lot of people that have stories that are impactful and powerful, but when you can, as a listener, connect in with, I'm watching the news and you are trapped inside of the Murrah building. Like, will you bring the listeners back just in case they don't have that frame of reference to where this turning point in your life story is happening?
Yeah. So I was working at a credit union, a financial institution inside the Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. I'd been working for this credit union for about 7 years, started out as a teller. And the morning of April 19th, 1995 was just a typical spring morning. Nothing remarkable other than it was a beautiful day. I remember sitting at my desk on the 3rd floor, front and center of the windows of the building. And a coworker came in. She was 7 months pregnant. She sat down next to me. I remember turning to ask her what she needed. And I'm not sure if the words ever came out or not, because that's when the bomb went off. And when the bomb went off, I felt and heard this tremendous roar. Everything went black and I could feel this powerful rushing sensation, like I was falling. And I was falling. I was actually falling 3 floors. Wow. And I was buried under about 10 feet of rubble. I could hear people screaming all around, and this woman was screaming right in my ear, "Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me." And then realizing that that was my voice. Like, I didn't even recognize the sound of my own voice. Yeah, I was so terrified. And I landed and everything was black. I couldn't see anything. Whether I opened my eyes or closed my eyes, it was pitch black. I could not move. It was very hard to breathe. It was very hot. And there was a smell that just burned. And all the screaming had stopped and it was quiet, other than hearing what sounded like fireworks going off every so often. And I would scream, help me over and over again. But, there was no reply. And it was about 45 minutes before I heard men's voices, and they were searching the rubble for the daycare babies. We had a daycare on the 2nd floor. And I started screaming and they said, "We hear you, we can't see you, we have to follow the sound of your voice." So as they got closer and they located the rubble pile where I was at, my right hand was sticking out of the side of the rubble pile. So they found my hand and I felt the pressure of someone taking my hand, and I thought they were getting ready to, 1, 2, 3, pull me up and out. But around the time they found my hand, I heard men yelling in the background, "There's another bomb, there's another bomb, we have to go, let's go now, there's another bomb." And so at this point, I knew that it had been a bomb. I'm now waiting for another one to go off and I'm stuck. I can't go anywhere. So my rescuers have to leave. And I just tell them my name, tell my family I love them, because I feel like, this is it. This
Saying
is it.
goodbye.
Mhm. And so then what happened was I began having what a lot of people refer to as life flashing before your eyes, where you just suddenly are faced with, this is it. And I realized, I had been living such a complacent life. I'd flunked out of college. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had gained 200 pounds. I really just had no purpose in my life at all, no direction, no purpose, and was just floating along in a just complacent fog, basically. And then all of a sudden this happens, and I realize how I had wasted my life. And I began praying or bargaining, whatever you want to call it, with God, just begging for a second chance. Just if I had a second chance, I would do things differently. And at one point, I actually began singing a song I had learned years ago when I was growing up in church. And it was at that time that I felt peace. And I didn't know I was going to make it out alive. I just was at peace with what was going to happen next. And of course, there was not another bomb. And that whole experience was about 45 minutes. And they came back and they started working to get me out. And it was not easy. I was stuck, and it took them 6.5 hours. These men risked their lives in a very unstable part of what was left of this 9-story building trying to get me out. But when they did count to 3 and pull to get me out, I remember as I looked around, just not being able to comprehend what I saw in front of me, because it looked like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
They put me on the back of a gurney. They took me out the back of the Federal Building, and the sky, which had been beautiful that morning, was dark and cold and gray. But I remember taking that first breath of fresh air, and I promised God I will never live my life the same again. And I'd like to tell you, cue the Rocky music. I went running, and I,
Dun,
it didn't
dun,
work that
dun.
way.
Okay. It wasn't that easy. Darn it. Okay.
So, but so the first, I don't know how your life has been the past several years, but the first good 4 years after this happened, grief was just paralyzing. So it was very hard to get traction. There were a few changes I made right away, spiritually, some things relationship wise, but it took me a while to work through the pain and the grief to really begin to try to take some type of control of my life.
Yeah. Okay. So just to give some of the points that you had to wrestle with that were in that, I call it the dark night of the soul. It's a very long, dark valley, and pain can make you feel like you're the only person in the room, right? Very lonely. Do you know how many people, how many friends that you were like, they were gone?
Yeah. So we were very close where I worked. There were 33 of us, almost all women, and 18 of the 33 were killed. In
Okay.
addition, we were pretty close with everybody in the building, and there were about 100 people killed out of the 168 people killed that I knew. So you couldn't grieve that many people.
Sounds very overwhelming.
Very overwhelming. And, a lot of times at work, you have, a work best friend or whatever. And so my work best friend, she had 2-year-old, 3-year-old baby girls at home, and she was killed. And the girl sitting next to me, who was 7 months pregnant, was killed. And it was just more than you could bear. I mean, it was very difficult.
And what were your injuries?
I had a really large portion of my right leg that was cut out, but my bone was intact.
Okay.
And other than that, I had bruises, lacerations, just cut from head to toe. I had glass coming out of my body for several years after the bombing. There was so much glass embedded in it.
So was that a long, process of healing, surgeries, hospitalizations, physical therapy?
Very much so. It was probably around, this happened in April, and it was really about the end of the summer, I think, before I was physically feeling closer to normal. So it was several months of, rehab and physical therapy and all of that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you'd gained a tremendous amount of weight before that. So, surgeries, hospitalizations, pain meds, those aren't great for, feeling like you want to exercise or, do anything like that. So did you experience any kind of depression through this?
I did. I really struggled with depression and PTSD as well. So I was scared to leave the house. I would go somewhere. I remember, pre-COVID when we had cafeterias, right? I remember going to a cafeteria and it was in the summertime. And I remember a guy walked in the cafeteria like with a trench coat on.
Mm.
And I just panicked on the inside because all I could think of was like, he's going to pull out a gun. He's getting ready to like shoot everybody in here. And so all of a sudden I thought all these bad stories that I saw on the news that happened in other places, right? Because you never think they're going to happen in your hometown. All of a sudden, all these things I thought they can happen and they will happen. I remember going to a concert. I remember Vince Gill was in concert and I went to this concert and there were thousands of people at the concert. And then all of a sudden becoming just paralyzed with fear because all I could think of was, well, this would be the perfect place to kill a bunch of people if you wanted to set a bomb off. Right. And I had to leave and go home. I couldn't. So there were a lot of struggles with PTSD as well as dealing with grief. One of the things that I think was actually a blessing was the fact that where I worked, we lost over half our staff and our only location was the location in this building. And our sole purpose for existence was to serve the people in this building. Well, all of that was just destroyed. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we didn't want our financial institution to die, to be merged with another one, because we felt like somehow that would be like saying the memories of the people we lost, like, I don't know, it became personal, like to keep their memories alive. We had
to not fail. Yeah.
And so I became hyper-focused on helping rebuild the credit union. There was just a handful of us, but we were really focused on setting goal after goal and what we had to do to move forward. So it was kind of a good distraction at that time because I could lose myself in work and not think about the other stuff at times, So, and that actually ended up giving me the tools to realize, wait a minute, there's like a formula here, because amidst this situation where I can't believe our credit union did actually survive. I look back now and I'm just shocked, like that we actually made it. I realized what was keeping us going was hope of like setting these little goals and having these action steps that we felt like we could do. And it gave us hope, right? So and that's kind of what gave birth to this idea that one day I'm sitting at work and it had been a few years, and I'm thinking, wow, like, man, at work, I'm a rock star, but my personal life is still a mess. And why can't why can't this translate over to my personal life? And I remember taking out an index card at work and I wrote on the back of it, I want to go back to college. This was a really big deal because I flunked the remedial math class in college twice. That's how I flunked out. So I'm thinking, how am I going to go back to school? I mean, my grade point average is a 0.50. Who's even going to take me? Like, how is this going to work? It was overwhelming. But I wrote on this index card, I want to go back to school. And I wrote, the first step was look up the phone number to LSU. Like, I made the steps so tiny that they weren't overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then, a few years later, I graduated with my degree. And it gave me such confidence to see that, wow, I really can create change in my life. And I heard this author, I read this book and heard this statement in this book that said that hope is the idea that we have a future that is better and brighter than our past, and that we have a role to play in making that happen. And I feel like when you're the victim of something bad, there's a while where you're the victim because you are a victim of something that happened, right? It's not your fault. This thing happened to you. But at some point in your journey, if you want to become an overcomer, you have to take responsibility for that thing that happened to you, even though it wasn't your fault. Like, that's horrible. That sounds awful, but it's true. At some point, we have to say this bad thing happened to me, but here I am. And I now have to take responsibility for where I'm at, even though it wasn't my fault that this thing happened. And we have to start moving from being a victim to being this overcomer by taking these action steps, like figuring out, like, what do I want my future to look like? And how do I get there? What are the smallest steps that I can take given my current situation and my current limitations What are the very smallest things I can do to move in that direction of what I want my life to look like?
Breaking it down. I'm hearing you talk about partnering with hope, that it is a reciprocal relationship and that you have to choose to embrace it. And then those little tiny steps are the way that you begin to gain ground and increase traction to a different future, right? Or you can get stuck. So I want to dig into that with you. I want to touch back to something because in the loss of my husband killed in the line of duty, he had 9 other people there with him that day, right? And 3 others were shot. One continues to live with a disability, and then a bystander was permanently paralyzed. And the thing that I noticed, and we just had the Boulder shooting here in Colorado, and so I have connected with many law enforcement and people who were there that day, and they're really struggling with survivor's guilt. I could have done something different. I should have known. I need to, like you talked about your friend that had the 2 and 3-year-old little kids, right? And so you're watching them, grow up without their mom and things like that. And so what do you get the opportunity to sit down with this group of men and women who have, who were there and they were unable to save my husband, right? Or, someone who's watched it. I know so many widows and widowers who have survivor's guilt from finding their spouse needing to do, chest compressions or something like that. They were unsuccessful. So they just carry this huge weight of like, what could I have done? Could I have known? And that's, you're talking about the hypervigilance piece, right? Where now every time you're at a cafeteria or a concert, you're constantly scanning for the threat, trying to not allow this kind of thing to happen again.
In addition, when I was in the hospital, I got phone calls from all of the families of my coworkers asking if I remembered what they were wearing that day, because they were searching for their bodies and wondering what they were wearing so they could find a piece of clothing. And I had seen lots of my friends that morning, and I could not remember what most of them were wearing at all. And so I find myself sometimes at work, noticing what people are wearing. And then the thing that's really difficult for me, and I don't talk about it very often, but the girl I was sitting next to, I was ignoring her. I just was. I was like, what does she want? I'm busy, and I signed on my computer and I took a phone call and I just took my sweet time before I turned to say, hey, what do you need? And I have thought a million times, she was pregnant. She probably was going to, because my office was close to where the bathroom was on the hall. She probably had to go to the bathroom, and she probably was stopping by my office to find out whatever she needed to find out on her way to the bathroom. And if I would have not been ignoring her, if I would have turned to her and asked her sooner what she needed, maybe she would have already been on down the hall. And if she would have been in the bathroom, she would have not been hurt. And so I don't know the answer for that. I know logically we say that you're not supposed to do that and that you can't do that, but I don't know how you stop yourself from doing it. I don't know how you stop yourself from thinking, well, maybe if I would have done this, or maybe if I would have done that. And so it is something that bothers me to this day. I've been through therapy and everything, and I know logically the answers, but I just frankly do still struggle with that.
And I see that across the board. An officer will say, well, if I would have been able to communicate 20 seconds quicker, that I had this suspicion that the suspect had a gun, or, what if we had arrested him in a different place and not that place? Or, what if, and there was information that came out later, right? Which was that you don't have in the moment, but you still hold yourself accountable for later, even though it's, kind of a type of mind reading or fortune telling, to go back and say, well, here's all of this armchair quarterback where we could have adjusted all of these circumstances. And then, that wouldn't have happened. My friend lost her husband to complications from the flu. He was 27. He was a lineman, right? Very healthy young man. Those guys just don't usually die from complications of the flu. He was at the ER. He came back that night with some extra cough syrup and he died in his sleep, right? And she does the same thing that you're doing. What if I had seen? What if I had known? Why didn't I pick it up? I heard, and so I don't know that I have the answers either, but it breaks my heart when I see people who are in the thought loop, right? Who are on the hamster wheel of like, what did I do or didn't I do that could have impacted a different outcome? And so if you're listening today and you're hearing this and you can connect with that, just know that your struggle is seen and known and that you're not alone in it in any way. And that, some of the ways that we begin to unravel that are just to bring it into the light and to talk about it. So thank you for sharing that little nugget within your story, because it continually breaks my heart to see them not be able to connect with what you're talking about, because the part of survivor's guilt is like, I should be doing that, right? Like you're saying, I know I've been to therapy. I shouldn't be doing that. I shouldn't be walking myself through that path over and over. But the survivor's guilt says that you should, right? Because that's what you deserve for surviving, is that you have to live with this and that's your job. So you're talking about being 4 years in and struggling with the depression, the complex PTSD, that hypervigilance, the fear of loss of other people. And I'm sure, once you've lost, you realize that it is possible, right? That the statistical anomaly, that's real.
Yeah.
Right. So you have this conversation with God in the rubble, and you vow to make a difference, but it doesn't just pop out, like a fun, Rocky scene and your egg smoothies that you're having every morning. Was it just that one call? Like, what gave you the courage to partner with Hope?
Something started when I read the book, The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. That was long. It was a few years after the bombing. I read that book and started thinking, this bad thing happened to me, but how can I take this thing and turn around and use it in a way that would help other people? How can I take this from this awful, evil thing and turn it into something like, what can I make good out of it? And so I started talking and sharing my story with others. And as I started sharing and talking about it, I had so many people come up to me and thank me because it helped them to know someone who went through something awful that they could look at and think, well, you're doing okay. You're making it. So if you can make it through that, I can make it through this,
Yes.
And then setting my intention on, what, I want to do something different. I want to go back to college. I want to just starting with something, which for me, it was just going back to college. But then when I did it, it sparked just something inside of me like, wow, what else is possible? Like maybe I need to allow myself to dream and start just start doing stuff. And so I started this habit of asking myself, if I had a magic wand, what would I do?
Mm-hmm.
And then scaling it back to, okay, given your current situation and your current limitations, what are the smallest steps that you can take today to move toward that direction? I ask myself this question on the regular all the time. I journal it all the time just to keep clarity in my mind about who I really want to become, what I want my life to look like, with the impact I want to make, all those things. And so I started doing that. And one thing led to another. And I look back now, it's been 26 years since the bombing.
Wow.
And I look back now and I'm like, I look at the transformation in my life and I didn't set about to I'm going to have an amazing transformation. That's not what happened. I just knew I wanted to live differently. And I started just getting clear on what I wanted and leveling up a little bit at a time. And now I look back and I'm like, wow. I mean, a lot has changed in a good way. And so that is basically how I stumbled into this idea that hope is really just seeing and knowing what that better picture is you want for yourself, and knowing, you have a role. And there may be other people and faith and other things that play a role in that, but it's the idea that you also play a role, right? That you take steps, that you figure out what you need to do to help yourself in your journey to get there. And that's what sparks hope. When if you think about your own life, and you set a goal to do something and you make those action steps and it's one that in your heart of hearts you have agency over, that you can do, it sparks a little excitement because you're kind of like, I could do this,
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you are describing hope in such an approachable way, right? Like when you look at who you are today, it's like, oh my gosh, she's gotten these degrees and she's running the credit union and she's an incredible athlete and, she's overcome so much. But what you're saying is that when you just allow yourself to begin to open into that abundance mindset, right? That's the magic wand. Like there are no limitations. You can have anything you want. And then you go, okay, that's a beautiful dream. And then here's my reality. And what are the steps between my reality and my dream? And that just gives me chills because.
And that's how you move out of that victim mindset, I think, right? Because as a victim, you've been there, right? There's certain limitations that you had with this, a child and you're a widow and you didn't make it happen. And this thing happened to you. But at some point you had to go, here are my limitations. Now what can I do? Right. And you are somebody who has moved from this victim to this overcomer by doing that, by going, you know what? Okay, fine. Given my current situation, what can I do? And look at what you have and the impact you're making on other people's lives now. And all of us can do that. Like all of us can do that. We can all sit with, here's where we are. Okay, now what can I do? And let yourself dream a little bit about the kind of person you want to become.
Dreaming, that is a huge part of hope, is to be able to imagine a future different from where you are. Amy, this interview is inspiring me. Can we continue it in part 2 next week?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to this part 1 with Amy Downs. Amy, if they want to get in touch with you and learn more about your story, where can they find you?
It's amydowns.org. And my book, Hope is a Verb, is on Amazon.
Oh, that's amazing. Everybody, join us again next week for part 2 of my interview with Amy Downs. And if the Hopecast is connecting for you, would you rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite platform? Everybody, you are on my heart and my mind and in my prayers. And I look forward to connecting with you again next week on the Hopecast with Rachael Flick.
You've been listening to the Hopecast with Rachael Flick. To find out more, go to rachaelflick.com. While you're there, you can book Rachael for your next speaking engagement. Her inspiring message will be sure to engage and touch the heart of your audience at your next conference, church event, or business function. Go to rachaelflick.com to book her today. While you're online, you can discover more information about all of the platforms that this podcast is on. Also, be sure to click on the social media icons at the top of the page, and you will be directed to Rachael's social media sites. If you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, we would appreciate if you would subscribe and leave us a review. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time for another edition of the Hopecast with Rachael Flick.